As President Trump works to dismantle DEI and critical race theory, one organization has worked tirelessly to further all of these efforts at the state level, and that's the State Freedom Caucus Network. So here to break down what they're doing, what they've been up to so far, is President Andy Roth. So thanks so much for joining us here in studio today. So what does the State Freedom Caucus do, and what are some of the goals you guys have right now?
So as our name implies, it's pretty simple. There's the House Freedom Caucus up in Congress, which is made up of the most conservative members of Congress. But there's nothing like that at the state level in the 50 state capitals. And so what we do is we find the most conservative members of each state legislature, get them together, see if they want to form a Freedom Caucus. And then once they do, then we help them achieve conservative policies. And the thing here that people don't quite recognize is that in Congress, any congressional office has multiple staffers, they've got a press team, they've got all sorts of resources available to them. But state lawmakers are part-time lawmakers, which means a lot of them don't have staff, a lot of them don't even have an office. Like their desk on the chamber floor is their office.
Very glamorous.
Yes. And so they need help because they've got lobbyists talking in one ear and leadership talking in the other, and they don't have any support. So they need somebody to read the bills, provide vote recommendations, do all sorts of stuff. And that's where we come in.
I want to say to all our viewers out there, this is one of the most important groups in the country right now, near and dear to everything we care about on this show and at this network. Daniel Horowitz, we've had on here singing the praises of your efforts. And I know various people who've come into contact with this. I myself moved to Texas from California, realizing that the job would be to keep Texas red. The corruption, which we're going to talk about, is terrible in these red states, is supposed to be on your side, but people are waking up to this. So to give it an example, give some color here, what are some of the biggest achievements that you can point to the State Freedom Caucuses have achieved so far? So
Wyoming's a great example. I could talk for hours about other states, but Wyoming's very interesting. Think about this. The state house in Wyoming has had last year 57 Republicans to 5 Democrats. So you would think that they could pass all sorts of amazing things, but they don't because there are so many Republicans that are actually Democrats. But the only way they can get elected is putting an R after their name, which is what they do, and then they vote like Democrats. And so instead of 57 to 5, if you watched how they voted, it's more like 26 conservatives to 36 liberals.
Can I just stop you there? Because we're talking about Wyoming.
Yeah.
Red state central. Wyoming is full of ex-military people. Eric Prince has a place there. This is a place where there's no regular American before a few years ago would have thought this was even possible. This is Wyoming Republicans, and what you are here to say is that these people were all voting like Democrats.
Yeah, and here's the dirty little secret, is every red state is like this, unfortunately. Just Texas, Tennessee, South Carolina, even Florida. Florida probably is the best, but it's only because of DeSantis' strong leadership. If you put a weaker governor in there, the legislature, which is made up of mostly Democrats and moderate Republicans, they'll unwind a lot of the things that DeSantis has done. So that's what we're trying to fight. So back to Wyoming, our Wyoming Freedom Caucus started out with only 8 members. Within 1 year, they doubled to 16. And then last year, they won all their primaries, won a bunch more seats, kicked out a bunch of liberal Republicans, and now they're in charge of the Wyoming State House. So the Speaker of the House, which is very weird for me to say, is a Freedom Caucus member. And they passed school choice, they passed property tax cuts, they got DEI out of the state agencies. So we have the blueprint, we know what to do. We just got to do it in all 50 states.
Now, you mentioned Tennessee and Texas. I've lived in both of those states because I've lived in many states across the union. They're red states. They're not necessarily all conservative, though, as we would hope for them to be. When you look at it, though, these are also states, as Matthew, he used to live in California. He came to Texas. Well, they're also picking states like Tennessee. So what do you have to do then to make sure that these red states are actually going to stay red, even as the demographics are changing across the country?
This is an important distinction to make. Red states are red because the voters are conservative. But most people are paying attention to D.C. politics, Trump, Kamala Harris, Ukraine, inflation. most people don't know who their state rep or their state senator is, and they don't know what's going on in their state capital because it's not what they see first thing they wake up. And so there are a lot of liberals that can get elected into office with an R after their name, and that's how they're able to make Texas and Tennessee purple or maybe even blue in some respects. And so what we're trying to do with our state freedom caucuses is say, hey, this is happening in your state capital by Republicans. Help us out. And the great thing is that when voters see a Freedom Caucus member doing one thing and other Republicans siding with the Democrats doing something else, then the voters are now fully informed and they vote that way when they go to the ballot box.
Yeah, we see a lot of, I think, a lot more awareness on the part of voters in these states now. You certainly see that in Texas. I mean, there's these revolutions or rebellions happening against these state Republican parties. But one thing that we need to go into, which is really not even ideological at all in a way, is corruption. And let me tell you, it was like 12 years ago, I guess. There was a bunch of people in LA who wanted, where I was living then, who wanted me to write a treatment for a show instead of To Catch a Predator, To Catch a Politician. and my pitch for it was, because I was doing consulting at the time for private groups that wanted to get government contracts, and that was my actual little Matthew Peterson's red pill was, oh, wow, I see how this system works now, and I wouldn't call it a democracy, really. And the corruption was so prevalent. And the principle is, if there's no sunlight, right, which there isn't in state and local media anymore, state and local media has gone down the tubes a long time ago, then you know what's going to be there when you start looking into the darkness. The way I look at it is, it's like when you're a little kid picking rocks up and looking underneath them.
Yeah.
You know if the rock hasn't been turned over in a while, you're going to find something underneath it. Something creepy Carl is going to be there, right?
Yeah.
So do you find that this is the case? Are people aware of just how corrupt, right, the Republican Party is, the Republican senators and legislators are in these states?
They're waking up to it, but it's still really, really bad. In South Carolina, great example, the legislature appoints judges, not the governor. The legislature does. Well, guess what? The trial attorneys figured that out. Yeah. So like most of the state lawmakers are trial attorneys. They appoint a judge to the bench, and then in their private capacity as a trial lawyer, they argue cases in front of the person they just appointed. And there's even one lawmaker who wasn't a lawyer, who got elected, figured out the scam and said, I'm going to go get my JD. And so he became a lawyer and is part of the racket.
I can't.
And that's just one example. I mean, this happens all over the place.
Well, okay, so we know that D.C. is the swamp, right? But how bad are the states, right? Because we want to believe, right? 10th Amendment, states' rights, let's go. But how bad is it right now?
It's worse. And the reason why is because Republicans and Democrats come together. And I know that we do that a little bit in D.C., but it's ridiculous at the state level. Like a lot of budgets pass unanimously in states, like 105-0. Like if that's happening, you know you're getting fleeced.
Right.
And in South Carolina, let me go back there because that place is thoroughly corrupt. The Freedom Caucus there offered an amendment to the budget that said, okay, there's some spending in this bill that we don't like, but let's pass this amendment to make sure that the legislators can't personally profit off of the underlying spending bill. And you thought you set off a nuclear bomb in that place.
Like this was an easy one, you guys.
Yeah.
We weren't trying to trick you.
Yeah, and they fought it tooth and nail. And I know the Freedom Caucus, they had members come up to them afterwards saying, you're trying to take food off of my table. Like that's how it operates.
How dare you?
South Carolina is not an exception. Like this is happening everywhere. And that's what we're trying to expose.
So when it comes to the obstacles you face, I mean, maybe say more about what you're trying to do in these states, but what are the biggest obstacles?
It's just fighting the uniparty. Like what I like to say is that we win regardless. If we're able to convince them that school choice is good or cutting taxes is good, and we pass that, great, we just won. But if we lose that battle, we're still winning because we're exposing the uniparty to the voters. And that is our biggest problem, are liberal Republicans. Now, we do have freedom caucuses in blue states, in Illinois and Maryland. But guess what? The Republicans there have gotten so used to Democrats being in charge that they're not willing to fight. But then you bring a freedom caucus into a blue state, and then they start to fight because they get hope.
I'm curious, Andy. I mean, so exposing this to voters, this is one of the problems. I mean, I've talked about this with people over the years. Is the media that would cover this? I mean, how do you get around that? Because the state and local media is awful, right? Yeah. And sometimes there's no one watching anyway. So do you have any? How do you deal with that?
Actually, I won't say that it's 100% awful at the state level. There are some states that are good. There are other states that are carrying water for the swamp, and everything in between. So it's really a mismatch. But honestly, X has changed the game for state level politics. As long as lawmakers get onto X, as long as we as conservatives in the movement amplify their message, then we win.
All right, Elon and the boys up in D.C. are trying to DOGE everything. They're trying to cut all the waste, fraud, and abuse up there at the federal level. But we're also seeing now state initiatives for DOGE. How do you see these going? And is it actually going to be something where they can be successful at doing this at the state level?
So I would answer that two different ways. One is our Freedom Caucuses are attacking that issue as lawmakers. The Arizona Freedom Caucus, they wrote an amendment to a bill saying, let's get rid of these agencies, one of which was the all-important Arizona Iceberg Lettuce Council. And that got defeated by Republicans and Democrats. And then in South Carolina, our Freedom Caucus there offered over 100 amendments to the budget, cutting the Arts Commission, cutting film subsidies, electric vehicle filling stations, or whatever you call them, all defeated by Democrats and Republicans. So legislatively, it's still very, very tough. But the second part of my to your question, I would say, is it takes a strong governor to do it. And if Andy Biggs is elected governor in Arizona, if Ralph Norman is elected in South Carolina and a few others, then I think we would have a lot of momentum. But that's not till 2026. And frankly, I just don't see a lot of good Republican governors out there that are willing to tackle this.
When your organization comes to town, I mean, it sounds like you're trying to empower the leaders who are good, right, and give them the resources they need to fight the uniparty. Are there particular, do you have issues-based action, or is this really about going in and finding whatever they need? Are there particular issues that you take on in every state? How does that work?
Yeah, no. Our job is merely to support a state freedom caucus, whether it's in Montana, Wyoming, Arizona, Pennsylvania, or elsewhere. We just want to help them fight. Now, that doesn't mean we're going to help them raise taxes or anything like that. But if they are fighting for conservative policies, we'll help them. And we can connect them with thought leaders. We can connect them with conservative media like the Blaze. We can connect them with legal entities, because some of our freedom caucuses file lawsuits against woke agencies. We do all sorts of fun things. And we're giving them resources that they don't typically have at the state level.
So how can people at home get involved with this?
Yeah, great question. Go to statefreedomcaucus.org. You can see our map. You can find out where we're at. If you're in a state where we are, then support your Freedom Caucus. If you're in a state that we're not, find out who the most conservative lawmakers are and reach out to them and tell them to start a Freedom Caucus. And then I'm on X at Andy Roth.